Hello, it is time for the June wrap-up. Normally at the beginning of my wrap-up videos, I let you know that I have reading vlogs for nearly everything that I read, so if you want deeper thoughts on anything, go check those out. I did not post a single reading vlog this week. I recorded some, and none of them actually panned out. I just would record little snippets and then not finish them because life is just busy. So there were no vlogs this month. Maybe there will be one in July. Maybe I'll just have to wait until the summer's over before I can get back on track. But I did read 5 books this month, and I'm pretty sure I used every one of my stars. I'm confident that on the 5-star rating scale, every star rating that was available to me was used. So we've got a spectrum. We ran the gambit this month as far as my enjoyment levels go. So here we go. We are starting with Goddess of the River. So he stayed alive to fight as humanely as possible, although that was a paradox. Goddess of the River is a loose retelling of one of the tales in the Mahabharata, which is an Indian epic. It's made up of many stories, and there's one, I think, smaller story that tells a tale of a smaller character, and our author took that tale, kind of respun it, and made her own story off of it, as I understand. Now, I haven't read the original epic. However, when I was reading it, I did buddy read with a couple of people who have read and studied it, and so it was really, really interesting to read alongside them because they gave tons of context of what the original legend said and what was changed and what was kind of played off of but tweaked. Apparently a lot. Apparently it doesn't really resemble the original much at all, except for like the names and maybe the bare bones skeleton. But as I am not familiar with the original, I'm not going to try to repeat what other people have said. I'm just going to give you my perspective because I'm really just not the person. I don't have enough knowledge on it. So speaking of Goddess of the River specifically, we're following Ganga. Ganga was originally the goddess of a river, and she could control the waters. She could manipulate the waves and the currents. When people came to drink, she could either dry it up or give them plenty, and the story begins with her as a goddess, and as the humans come along and they start interacting with nature, how the gods and goddesses respond, and then eventually, due to a curse, Ganga is made mortal. And she tries to understand the curse, she tries to kind of untangle it from her life, but she is unable to, and she lives for years as the wife of a ruler, and as she has children, she one by one drowns them in her river as a way to essentially set them free from the cycle of humanity and allow them to become godlings. This is on page. This is shown in the book, and it's unpleasant, intentionally so, but some of them are kind of summarized and skipped over, which is good. I didn't need to read it over and over again, and the ramifications of that are throughout the entire book as well. I loved the start of this book because I think that the prose is beautiful. I think that the kind of language used to talk about the curse and trying to untangle the curse, going to different people to try to get it removed, as well as Ganga, who looked down on humanity, now becoming a human and having this very conflicting nature about her, where she now understands on a personal level the fears and desires of humanity, but also has this higher kind of view of herself and her kind. Yet she slowly, through her experiences, is becoming more and more entangled with being human, despite not really wanting to admit that about herself, and her attachment specifically to one child, which was saved from being drowned, and that desire to act against her nature as a goddess and instead by her nature as a mother and as a human. However, I struggled with the pacing of this novel. In the beginning, it was this slow, methodical, yet kind of confusing. I didn't feel like the curse was explained in nearly enough depth for me to really grasp it. Even by the end of the book, I still don't really feel like I understood the curse like I needed to, especially the way Ganga responded to it, because she didn't understand the curse herself, yet she knew what she had to do in order to save her children somehow, and she understood some aspects of humanity and other gods and goddesses, but then other aspects she didn't understand, and there seemed to be no rhyme or reason where her information came from and where the deficits were coming from. I even asked specific questions about the curse and like, why, if this is like this, then why is this like this? And I asked it in both my Discords of the people I was buddy reading with, and no one had any answers except for people who read the original. They could explain it to me based off of information given in the original tale, but not based off of information given in the book. So I do think that the curse needed to be further fleshed out, at least for as much as I wanted to understand. I mean, I guess I could have just gone with the flow, but I needed things to make sense to me. But there were major decisions made in this book that I just really wanted to unpack further, like big things that should come with huge consequences that I was like, okay, we need to sit here for a minute, and we would just kind of move right past them, big time jumps that would happen, and I just felt like we needed more time with it. And I think a lot of my problems with the characters, with understanding the lore, with understanding the characters' motivations, with the slow and then abrupt pacing of the story, I feel like a lot of the things that made this book what could have been a hit but ended up ultimately being very mixed for me. I think my main thing that I came away with was this book just needed to be longer. I think it tried to cover so much time and such a sprawling idea that packing it into, 300 pages just didn't do the story justice, in my opinion. That said, it was a really unique story, and even though I come away mixed with it, I'm not mad that I read it. Next is The Imaginary Corpse. I yelled at you because I was hurting, because I was mad at you, because you didn't trust me. You thought I would say no to danger, and not only is that a total misunderstanding of who I am, that is not a decision that you get to take from somebody. Her teeth clench. Ever. Okay, so this book, it follows an imaginary stuffed triceratops called Tippy, who currently lives in the Unreal. The book opens up, the prologue opens up with second-person narration. We are being spoken to. It's actually Tippy speaking to us. We've just arrived in the Unreal, and Tippy is comforting us. You are real. You are an idea that someone held on to and believed in and trusted in so much that you became real with a capital R. And even though you're not there with your person anymore, you are still real. So it begins in such a compelling hook where we have been displaced and we're in this place that is no longer wherever we were, and we're being comforted by stuffed triceratops that we are still real despite whatever has happened to us. After the prologue, it then switches to third person, and we're following Tippy as he is, as he's uncovering this mystery. So what the Unreal is it's the place that ideas go when they're no longer needed. That might not be the best description of it because it's actually more than just that, but that's like the main component of it that we're first introduced to. So the main component that we're first introduced to, what happened to Tippy is Tippy was an imaginary friend. His human, her dad brought home a stuffed triceratops from a business trip, gave it as a gift to her, and Tippy became a detective because that was what the little girl needed him to be. She needed to understand why dad had to leave so often. Why do mom and dad fight so much, especially when dad puts on that special cologne? Why do they always fight then? Why do Tippy's horns itch every time his person hears the words, "She wasn't supposed to repeat that"? So his little girl needed someone to help her understand the difficult things, the difficult adult things that were happening around her in life. And that was how Tippy, his personality, was made. And when a traumatic event, when something happened to her, which we find out in like chapter 2 or 3, that it was actually a horrific car crash, when something happened to her, their bond got severed. She no longer believed in or entrusted in Tippy, and now he is in the Unreal, and that's where ideas like that go. Other things go there too, but keeping it simple, that's the main component. So anyway, this is where those ideas are, and then something new enters the unreal and starts killing off ideas or friends. And that shouldn't happen. Friends shouldn't just be snuffed out. That doesn't happen here. So how is this happening? So Tippy's trying to figure it out. Doesn't all that sound really interesting? Doesn't all that sound so cool? I think so too. And the Unreal is a pretty interesting place too. There's the Playtown Zone, which is where Tippy lives, where everything has soft corners and smiling faces, and it's very kiddish because, you know, Tippy is very kiddish. But then there's a sci-fi zone, there's an Avatar zone, like there's a bunch of, it's a very thought out place. And I think my main thing that made this book ultimately a miss for me is in the way that it was all executed. The ideas, excellent, love, but the execution was a miss for me. Doesn't mean it'll be a miss for you, so let me explain why it was a miss for me so that you can decide if you want to pick it up or not. One of the main reasons it was a miss was in the method of delivery. The still reel is explained to us in very expository ways. Tippy explains to new friends, this is what this is, that's what that is, this is the purpose of that, there you go, you got it, cool, okay? Now we'll move on to the next thing, and I'll tell you all about that too. Same with the way people or friends in the Unreal express what's happened to them, express what they're working through, come into conflicts. Tippy goes through a personal character arc, he makes mistakes, and he learns from them, and he adjusts, and he grows. The way in which he realizes his character arcs is very... I felt like so much of this book seemed like it was written for middle schoolers because of the way everything was explained thoroughly in detail, the way emotions were explained, the way Tippy would respect his friends and respect new people, the way he would interact with them when he made a mistake and a friend was explaining their feelings, the way they explained their feelings, and then the way Tippy would respond. A lot of it just felt like this therapeutic working through the best kind of interactions, which then ended up reading less like natural dialogue and more like instructional, useful, but instructional working through traumatic things. So everything just felt kind of muted to me. It felt like it was meant for a younger audience because of the way everything was kind of over-explained, but at the same time, very dark things were happening. I mean, the kind of things that happened to Tippy's kid and to other friends' kids in order to sever their connection was dark. The villain of the story, what was happening there was dark. It was like, it went to places that wouldn't be suitable for a middle grade audience, I wouldn't think, at least the way it was told. Yet, the way the story was presented felt young to me. It was all very hopeful, it was all very thoughtful and kind. Tippy, the character, was very, very kind, and the way things were explained to the reader were very, very kind. This seems really nitpicky, but when you're in the story, or at least when I was in the story, and it seemed like there was this tonal imbalance the whole time, and I felt like everything was being over-explained to me and like handed to me, one person, after I wrote out my really long review trying to work through my feelings, one person summarized it all really nicely. It likes to tell the reader how to feel a lot, which sort of weakens a lot of the emotional beats. Yes, those weren't my words, but I feel that. Then again, there were a couple of people that read this book in the Discord with me and loved it, like really, really connected with it. It really seemed like it was one or the other. It seemed like people either gave it like really strong reviews or very weak reviews, and there wasn't a lot of in the middle. I ended up landing on the weak side of it. Next book is Changes. This review will be shorter, I promise, because it's book 12 in a series. But this is my 5-star book of the reading, and I shouldn't give you a quote. I know what quote I want to give you. You know what quote I want to give you if you read it, but I will just put it on the side of the screen. Changes is book 12 in the Dresden series. It's the book that everybody's like, oh, you read book 1? Wait till Changes! I've loved it. It was my favorite book so far. Changes was just so fun. My goodness. It was like the all-star cast. All the characters that are kind of in and out of different books are present and active. Harry is introduced at the very beginning in the very first page to a brand new conundrum that is far outside of his breadth that he's ever dealt with before. And it's something that is very emotionally charged for him. It's something that really his character has been building up to for these 12 books. I didn't realize it was his character was building up to this, but as soon as it happened, it's like, oh, sure, this makes sense for his character that he would have to go through this. And it takes everything in him to fight for handling this thing. And it takes his friends as well who rally around him, most of them. Some of them are like, shucks, dude. And he has to give a lot of himself in order to do what he thinks is the right thing to do. And when I say a lot, I mean things that he has fought to preserve, he surrenders for this. So it was a very emotionally impactful story for Harry and for really what the themes of this series have been up to this point. I enjoyed it so much. This series is flawed. I feel like I say that a lot. I feel like I need to keep saying it because there are things about the series that I don't like. But despite its deficits, what this series does well, it really does extraordinarily. And I really loved book 12. It's my favorite so far. And I do have a spoiler review for it, so you can check that out if you enjoy spoilers. Okay, next up is City of Saints and Madmen. And this is a Vandermeer book, and I have struggled so much to try to figure out how to talk about this darn book. All writers write, he whispered. All writers edit, he muttered. All writers have a little darkness in them, he sobbed. All writers must sometimes destroy their creations, he shouted. But only one writer has a darkness that cannot be destroyed, he thought to himself as he clutched his wife to him and kissed her and sought comfort in her, for she was the most precious thing in his life. And he was afraid of loss, afraid of the darkness, and, most of all, afraid of himself. I will not believe in hallucinations. So the kind of sci-fi that Vandermeer writes is things that are so strange. He's not trying to write the most technical sci-fi, he's trying to write oddities, but in a way that is cohesive and compelling. At least that's how I interpret his books. So City of Madmen and Saints is a collection of academic papers all about this fictional town called Ambergris. There are mushrooms, mushroom people, a fixation with squids, squid books, squid fairy tales, squid cults, squid academic papers written in squid ink. This all sounds strange, and it deeply and desperately is, but much like Vandermeer's other books, it still has this feeling of everyday life, of just the mundane, that also makes it feel normal. He creates these settings and these situations and these worlds that when you say it, it sounds absurd, but the way it's written, it seems correct. It seems natural. The stories are so rooted in the mundane that it just seems like this is what the world is. Yet it escalates and it builds. And sometimes it's told in this light, whimsical tone of voice. Sometimes it's told in this very dark, sinister, sometimes gruesome way. Sometimes it's told with such sarcastic humor. Some of the footnotes in these documents that we're reading through are just a delight. This is a collection of works. It's a series of short stories, novellas, history excerpts, footnotes, fragments of drafts, reminders, illustrations, dream journals, coded messages that we have to decode, correspondences, glossaries. It's just this amalgamation of information that seems just disjointed sometimes and seems totally connected. It's artifacts and fingerprints of other people who have read it on top of those artifacts. And it does all lead to something. It builds to something that is foreshadowed. The clues are there. You can put it together. But it all comes with a purpose. And It's so hard for me to describe because I adore Vandermeer's writing and storytelling styles. I love the journeys that his books take me on. And each of his books, I think, have an element of dissatisfaction where he doesn't answer everything. He doesn't always bring everything together. There's this air of there's things missing here. And I think he does it on purpose. I think he crafts these stories and these worlds that intentionally feel incomplete. And I do think that City of Saints and Madmen is one of those things, just written in a very unique and different way. And I'm usually fine to recognize that, yeah, this story is intentionally incomplete and I don't get to know it all. I think Annihilation was severely that way and Born was that way as well. And I was happy with both of those. Yet, for some reason, with City of Saints and Madmen, I left feeling not fully satisfied, even though I know that this is what I know that Vandermeer wasn't trying to give me everything, wasn't trying to circle back to everything. There was still a piece of me that was there was just a piece of me that was still wanting more. Even now, I still can't fully put my finger on what left me feeling a little bit dissatisfied with the story. Certain things that just didn't feel completely complete. I'm giving it 4 stars right now. I'm not married to that rating because I've already started the sequel, which I'm already really, really enjoying. And there's 3 books total. I plan on finishing up the sequel as well as reading book 3 in July. So I am going to complete it. I mentioned in my TBR video that I wanted to do a reading vlog for it. I don't know if that'll happen. We'll just see what the month looks like. But when I do complete the trilogy, in that wrap up at the very least, I will give more cohesive, okay, this is what I think now that I've completed them all. This is what the series is. But I did love the experience of reading City of Saints and Madmen. Also come away feeling a little bit unsure of what my final thoughts on it are. Oh no, okay, final book that I read this month is Bride. So Amber, Elise, and I have a book club where we talk about, where we take turns reading each other's type of book because we have opposite bookish taste. Sometimes there's overlap, but we're different. And her first pick for the book club was A Court of Mist and Fury, and I hated it. And then I had her read Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and she hated it. And now she's got me reading Bride, and I hated it. So she's going to read Annihilation next, and I expect her to hate it. But we have so much fun discussing books that we have exact opposite opinions on. So if you ever want to catch one of those, we haven't decided on the date yet for Bride, but you know, there will be an announcement before it happens. So Bride, how can I tell you about this in a spoiler-free manner that doesn't take me 15 years? Okay, so this is romantasy. We have romance, we have fantasy. The first half of the book is very fantasy heavy. The second half of the book is very romance heavy. I hated both. I almost liked the romance, but it really just tried to kill itself. So the fantasy elements, okay, so we follow Misery. Our main character, her name is Misery. She's a vampire named Misery. And she, there's a system at play among the vampires, werewolves, and human, which have a very tenuous agreement. They don't get along, they don't like each other, they don't really cohabitate very often at all, but they have this collateral system where they will send the leaders of the vampires and the humans will exchange a child that is significant to the leaders, and they have to live with them for a period of time as collateral. So if their peace agreements aren't kept, the child dies. And that's kind of how they keep their peace. And Misery was collateral when she was a child, and since then she's been ostracized, like she's not considered a part of the vampires. She was bullied heavily. She's just been very isolated. And because of that, she's chosen to live among the humans, but filing down her fangs and wearing colored contacts, trying to just kind of blend in. But really, she only has one person in the world that matters to her, and that's her adoptive sister. When she lived among the humans, she was the one person that she had this bond with, Serena, who's now gone missing. And It's kind of slowly revealed how this is all tangled together, so I won't really say anything beyond that other than a new system begins. Now they're sending a vampire off to marry the new alpha because the werewolves, someone, his name is Lo, he challenged the old alpha and became the new pack leader, and so they're sending a vampire to him to be his new bride. But, like, it's only a year-long agreement. She's only going to marry him for a year, and then I guess they're going to get divorced and go back. So the marriage thing is pretty convoluted, actually. There's no reason for them to call it a marriage except for this is romantasy. So having a marriage of negotiation fits better for forcing the romance, even though it doesn't actually make sense to negotiate a marriage that will end in a year, no matter what. Like, anyway. She gets married. The book begins with a marriage, and she's sent off. So it starts very lore heavy, and it was hard. Okay, so the vampires are kind of basically stripped of near everything that makes vampires interesting. They're not actually supernatural characters at all. It's just some sort of genetic regression that's made them sensitive to sunlight. They don't burst into flames when they're in the sun. They don't die. It does affect them, but it doesn't not like vampires typically it affects them. Yeah, what sets us apart is less to do with the occult and more with spontaneous genetic mutations thousands of years down the line. A purine base here, a repositioning of hydrogen atom there, and ta-da, vampires feed exclusively from blood. So it's not really explained at all. It's just like, you know, genetics. That's why we're vampires. You know, they're not immortal. They don't have any of the basic vampire traits except for that they drink blood, but typically they drink from blood bags that they get from the blood bank, which I think is just as morally questionable because now, instead of inventing a system like something like the Vampire Diaries did, where they have like consensual partners that give blood, now they're like, we just get it from the blood bank. So we just take blood from the most vulnerable. We feed daily. We have to drink a blood bag every single day, and there's thousands of us. So thousands of vampires, of people, are taking blood from the blood bank daily. 2 times a day they have to feed if it's the summertime. But so they're taking from the most vulnerable, like people who need emergency blood transfusions. Just what? You just don't get blood? Like, but that's never hashed out. Like, there's no actual implications of it. I'm sorry, I'm being mean. Let me calm down. There's a lot of the lore stuff that I think just really isn't thought out and that is made very bland for the sake of not having to deal with a lot of moral grayness in the very structure, like just to make it very simple, very baseline, and then we move on. But then there's also so many inconsistencies. Like there's a chapter where Misery is attacked by a werewolf and he's literally like about to kill her, and the thing that saves her life is that she kicks him in the groin, and then that he backs off, and then she's able to kind of like maneuver in a different position, and then she shows him her fangs, and then he whimpers and like yips back, even though it's made very clear that werewolves are stronger than vampires, and their fangs are more deadly than vampires. Like, that's on-page lore. But, like, werewolves shrink back when vampires show their fangs. Here it is. My knee hits his groin and he wails. I use the distraction to push him away. It isn't easy. Blah, 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 blah. So that happens. And then 50 pages later, she's in a confrontation with Lo, her new husband. He's not attacking her. Lo's a sweetheart. Yeah. and this is her internal monologue. I could just knee Lo in the groin and try to run away, but I don't know if the crotch area is as sensitive to them as it is to us. Well, honey, this saved your life 50 pages ago, so I feel like you should know. And this happens all throughout the book, where something is stated and then later it's like everybody in the room has forgotten what happened 50 pages ago. Misery, I don't like. She's very try-hard, like, cool girl. Or not cool girl. She's not a cool girl. Very try-hard, like, aloof and tough, which is intentional. She's been isolated her whole life, and she just kind of has to fend for herself, toughen herself. Nobody likes me. Nobody wants me. Everybody wants to kill me. I don't care. Like, it's intentional, but the way it comes off is just kind of grating to me. And she just, like, cannot catch a hint. Like, the girl, she tries to be smart, but she is not. Like, at one point, she starts snooping around Lo's room, going through his stuff, sitting on his bed, and she has not asked a question about werewolves. Like, she does not care about werewolf lore at all, but information keeps getting handed to her, and then she keeps just like not internalizing any of it or responding to any of it. So when she gets caught snooping and trying to get data, trying to hack systems, and Lo confronts her and he's like, yeah, I know you were in my room. I could smell you everywhere. And she literally responds, oh, I didn't consider that you would be able to pick up my scent. Misery, the one thing you know about werewolves, the one thing that you keep repeating as your baseline information about them is their incredible sense of scent. The chapter before this, someone informed you that Lo can smell when someone's lying to them because of baseline chemical changes or like changes in their body as they're lying. But you didn't think that he could smell you if you rifle through his stuff and sit on his rifle through his stuff and sit on his bed. Like, I don't like the lore, I don't like Misery, and then the romance was almost good. It near got me. All the buildup was really cute because, again, Lo is a sweetheart. He is so tender and so kind and sincerely cares. He cares about his people, he cares about peace, he cares about Misery, he cares about his sister. But the romance then turned weird and I personally thought cringy, but I mean, you know, that's obviously very subjective. And then it got really annoying. Many romance books will create some sort of forced confrontation in order to, I don't know, have false tension at the end of the story, and this book is no different, but it was the most abrupt, jarring, and frustrating forced tension I have read in so long. Like, it was like a personality shift happened in how obscenely abrupt it was. Like, one sentence, this is happening, the next sentence, it's like, we're done now. And it was intentionally that way, and like, I'm trying to protect you, I want your freedom, like, eh. But it was the most frustrating thing. And not only was it that, but it was like, it was too far. A lot of times these things go too far, like using your your greatest insecurity, your greatest pain that you told me in confidence against you to hurt you. And then when it's time for the reader to just get over it and move on and get on board with the romance again, I'm like, no! Like, I'm still mad. This book it wasn't gonna win me over with the lore. It wasn't gonna win me over with the main character, but it could have won me over with the romance, but it shot itself in the foot and set itself on fire. Anyway, I think that's quite enough. Anyway, those are the 5 books that I read this month. Sorry this wrap-up wasn't more positive. Maybe next month will be better. Please chat with me more in the comments if there's any book here that you've read or are interested in reading. I would love to hear. I'll see you again soon. Bye.